Good morning. If y'all would play, I'm going to ask Mr. Battles if he'll pray us in. And y'all do know that Bob passed this morning. And if you don't mind, Mr. Battles.
Yes, sir. Father God, we come to you this morning. We have heavy hearts. One of our own, one we love. We know you love him better, and we're so thankful that your word says to be absent from the bodies, to be present with the Lord, and we can't even understand that this morning. We're so thankful for the life of Bob and his influence, not only as a legislator, but as a human being. We pray for his family that are going through very difficult times, and they will in the days to come, and we will also. So we just ask for your grace and mercy and your strength, that you would comfort, that you would heal, but also that you will encourage us to go forward in this life that you have called us to live. Bless our time here today. May everything be done according to your will and your purpose, because we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Paul, Mr.
Yes,
Mr. Battles, just stay there.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to do things a little different. We're going to have Mr. Battles presenting his bill, then I'm going to call individuals to present theirs because they don't know it, but they've got a meeting probably here in just a second. Mr. Battles, would you go?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and ladies and gentlemen of the Rules Committee. I bring to you House Bill 727. You'll find that on page 3 under Modified Structure Rule. This is a fireworks bill that concerns itself with allowing the local governments to not only have the opportunity for permitting and locating of those sites, but also public safety. And this has been vetted very well in the committees, and so I'd ask for your favorable consideration for this to pass on to the floor.
Mr. Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the presentation. I talked to somebody early on. I know this has been changed a great deal,
yes, sir.
But can you just say it so it's clear to me? If a local government wants to prevent, so if Peachtree City wants to prevent a tent from being permitted, it's within their province to adopt ordinances to prevent that if they want to, within the boundaries of our city.
There's various reasons why that they, the biggest thing is health and safety, those issues. And there's also the provision that it has to be within 1,000 feet of a fire hydrant. So there's a lot of things that would evaluate that and their ability to cover that in case of an emergency. So they have a great leeway as being the controller of the decision of whether or not there is a site.
But for the character of the community, aesthetics reasons, which is, I mean, Peachtree City's, they kind of jealously guard that.
Right.
Could they promulgate an ordinance to prevent them from coming on those grounds?
They have sole discretion on
that's what I thought.
On permitting.
Okay, thank you.
No more questions. Mr. Weldon, push your button. You speak to your bill.
605.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Paul. I mean, Mr. Battles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 605, it's under modified structure, about a third of the way down under that title. This bill just is a statutory mechanism for us to provide for giving someone who's in the judicial retirement system to move from part-time to full-time service. And we need this because
Go ahead.
we need this because there are people that, well, there's about 50 people this will affect, but the impact on the state is if they move from part-time to full-time service, and we don't have this in place to give them credit for the vested rights they have, then it could end up in litigation, and there's no reason for that to happen when we could address it here.
No questions. Thank you. Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mentioned yesterday on page 2 under modified structured House Bill 508. House Bill 508, it simply makes all our state level judges have the same retirement eligibility age of 60.
No questions. Thank you. Mr. Coomer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one great bill and one really good bill to ask you for. The great bill is on page 2 under modified open, House Bill 1072, related to service cancelable loans for Georgia National Guard members. And I apologize it's late in coming, but we didn't really need this change until we had gotten through the appropriations process. And now we need this change to bring this program into compliance with the current HOPE requirements. That's House Bill 1072. And then the really good bill is on page 3 under modified structured. And it's only really good because it actually needs an amendment. But once you amend it, it'll be great. And that's House Bill 973. That is a bill regulating tow truck operators on the interstate. And the amendment, I have to thank Chairman Powell, Jay Powell, found a problem with my amendment. So my amendment is AM 390154 on the desk, changes a civil penalty in the code to a misdemeanor at the request of law enforcement. And in that amendment, though, I'm going to ask you to strike the words "or any rule or regulation issued by the department," so that the amendment will just read, "Any person violating this code section shall be guilty of a misdemeanor."
Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Why does the department want to charge a towing person a misdemeanor if they slip up and not renew their permit?
Well, it's really, the entire bill is about safety on the interstates. And so what we want to do is have some enforcement mechanism to make sure that folks are not operating on the interstates without this training requirement that's in the bill. And so if they don't get the training, they don't get the permit, and they and are operating on the interstate anyway, then they would be subject to a misdemeanor penalty.
Further question, Mr. Chairman. Is it not true the rules that the department, rules and regs the department puts together could put a rule stating that if any permit holder let their permit expire, then if they had been previously charged with an amendment, they couldn't get a permit again? Isn't that true?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but they can't make rules that would be inconsistent with the statute, and the statute governs the permitting apparatus broadly. So I'm not sure that they could make a rule that would be inconsistent with that. But by striking the words "or any rule or regulation issued by the department," we are eliminating that risk.
I bet they can. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No more questions. Thank
Thank you, Chairman.
you. Mr. Hightower.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On second page, modified structured, second down, HB 171, one that I asked for you guys yesterday. This just adds a eighth factor in the form nonconvenience. When a court is looking to transfer venue, they're going to establish whether or not the state or country they're sending that case to protects that person under due process and the same privileges under our Constitution.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. On the third page, about 3/4 of the way down, I have House Bill 1043 under modified structured. And Mr. Chairman, what this looks to do is create a little problem some of our hospitals are having when wanting to go out and give kind of job site vaccines and like job health fairs to give influenza shots. We know it's a good public policy for people to get their flu shots, and we're just trying to make sure that that they're clear about what they have to do and what restrictions are on them when they're trying to go out to those job sites, Mr. Chairman.
No questions.
Thank you.
Seatmate, you're up.
I'm ready. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring to you House Bill 1084. It's on the first page under open rules. This legislation amends the code section to assign the reading of and maintaining and management of all aspects of the agricultural water metering program to the Georgia Forestry Commission. Presently, the Georgia Forestry Commission is reading 3/4 of the meters.
Anybody have any questions, Ms. House? No questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jaspers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Rules Committee. I sure appreciate your time and perseverance in these weeks leading up to day 30. What I have is in your book is House Bill 1060. It's LC 41076S. It's a substitute. It's a cleanup bill we've been doing every year or two to fix the issues that pop up in our state relating to weapons and the carrying them in our state. And House Bill 1060 will address issues like people moving here from other states that have reciprocal license with us and the length of time that they have to get a renewal or a new license in Georgia. It also directs probate judges on the status of a license holder when they are married, change of address, things like that. We address that Georgians while hunting and fishing may have a knife without a license while hunting and fishing. We were asked to clarify in this code section what we meant by leased government property, and we did. This bill will allow a church to continue to prohibit or allow weapons if they choose, though if a Georgian enters by mistake or accident, they'll now be asked to leave. If not, they would treat it as a trespasser. This comes from the concern of the web of churches that are in and out of that section. Many have asked for safety information to be displayed at the licensing getting point. That's the probate judge's office, and we're doing that. The DNR will also provide hunter safety contacts on their website. We ask those who served in federal law enforcement and retired to be able to carry in our state with some qualifications. We also address the very serious issue of law enforcement having to walk to courthouses unarmed amongst those that they're fixing to testify against, and we give some definition on how that should be handled at a courthouse. In Section 8, what you call it, if you'll look at that, we address the ongoing concern by those who in this code section. This is important. It's a good one. But I'll be glad to answer questions now or on the floor about this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
The reciprocal portion of it, South Carolina, and so I'm directing it, Mr. Powell, since he's close over there. Have they got a reciprocity agreement with us?
No, sir.
Would we be giving them the right to come in here with their license?
No, sir. No, sir, though we would not.
It's just the states that we have agreements with.
Yes, sir.
Okay, no more questions. Mr. Raffensperger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, the Rules Committee. I bring before you today two bills. The first one would be HB 713 on the bottom of page 2, modified structure rule. Simply put, this bill would terminate the parental rights of a rapist who has fathered a child. Thank you.
Any questions? No questions. Do you want to ask for 790?
If I could, sir, thank you very much.
Just ask. Don't get carried away here. You've been going to school with Mr. Jaspers.
HB 781, which is on page 3, modified structure, 790, I'm sorry. 781, I'm sorry. 790. I'm sorry, was having a false alarm, which was going back to the swatting, which I brought before yesterday. Thank you.
No questions. Thank you. Mr. Broderick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. This morning I bring to you, it's on the third page, about 2/3 of the way down, HB 926. HB 926 adds new definitions to the Pharmacy Practice Act. These definitions from the FDA are a result of new laws passed by the FDA, which created these new types of distributors and mandated that each state create such licenses for these entities. And I'll use an analogy. We can track a bag of lettuce from the field to the grocery store, and shouldn't we have the same ability for safety and protection for our drug supply chain? Thank you.
No questions. Thank you. Mr. Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring to you a bill that is out of this world and is on page 3, House Bill 734. That is the Georgia Spaceflight Act. It basically adds an informed consent waiver, and it applies to willing spaceflight participants only. And basically what it does is allow us, this will set a minimum standard in Georgia code and allows us to be competitive with 7 other friendly space states. And so we have met that standard here in this bill. If you have any questions, I'll take them.
No questions. Mr. Kidd, would you get...
Thank you.
Bill 889, first page, 3/4 the way down. It passed Mr. Dixon's subcommittee unanimously, passed Mr. Meadows' committee unanimously, supported by the Georgia Funeral Home Association and Independent Funeral Home Association. Clearly states if an individual has more than one funeral home, and in one of the funeral homes he has a crematory, as long as they're both under the same name within a 40-mile radius, they can advertise that he has 2 funeral homes and 1 crematory.
No questions. Thank you. Ms. Taylor. Ms. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Today I bring you House Bill 1053, Modified Structure, page 3, 6 from the bottom. I was approached by the Board of Education in Grady County, and they have asked to become a nonpartisan.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Hitchens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I have 3 bills today. The first is in modified open, House Bill 1064 on page 2, the third one down. I'm carrying it on behalf of the Department of Public Safety, and it provides for the use of motor vehicles by Department of Personnel in off-duty status. This is a public safety and an officer safety bill in that we have a lot of events that occur now, both public and private, in which there's large traffic problems. This will provide for safety for the public and allowing them to use their vehicles to direct traffic in and out of those. And it also provides for the safety of the troopers involved, because they have no radio contact if they're out there without them, because the walkie-talkies that you see on their shirts actually transmit back through the car, and they only carry about a 1/4 mile. So they're out there by themselves without a blue light and without any communications.
No questions. Next one.
The next one is modified structure on page 3. It's about halfway down, House Bill 976. This is a records management bill. It's for GMA and the chiefs of police primarily, but it also includes all other police agencies. And although a lot of people don't realize it, the police agencies would really like to have body cameras today. And the problem with it is the initial cost is pretty substantial. But what we found out, and I'd like to credit Chairman Willard here, he's done most of the research on this and most of the legal work, is that the storage is probably 3 or 4 times more costly than it is to purchase the cameras. And right now they're required to maintain the videos for 5 years. This reduces it to 30 months, which I think covers all the ad litem cases and is in compliance with all the laws and would save, the gentleman from the Marietta Police Department came and spoke, and it could be over a couple $100,000 a year for them for storage.
Next one.
My last one is the last one on the back page under structured rule. This is the one I was here about yesterday. I called it the Returning Heroes Act. It allows for anybody that's from the Department of Defense that's assigned to a combat area designated by the President of the United States. When he returns, he has 60 days to pay his property taxes without having to pay a penalty.
Good bill. No more questions. Thank you. Mr. Werkheiser.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. On page 1, a little more than halfway down, House Bill 749. This was requested by a couple of regional commissions. It would just allow them the same privileges of that of a statewide board, and that is to meet by teleconference.
No questions. Mr. Cantrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Top of page 3, House Bill 725, the Child Abuse Records Protection Act. Last year in Georgia, over 9,000 children who reported that they were being abused were interviewed by Child Advocacy Center personnel, and these interviews were video recorded. The current law is unclear as to who may access these records and how that access should be achieved. So this bill addresses that problem by establishing that Superior Court judges are the gatekeepers of this information, and it clarifies the process that someone must go through in order to access these records legally. Thank you.
No questions. Mr. Kirby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the bottom, or next to last bill on page 1, under modified open, I bring you House Bill 934. This bill came out of the Kinship Care Study Committee we were on during the summer. All this bill does is create a website that the Department of Human Services will create that has all the different things that are available for these family members to access to help them raise those kids that aren't their normal mothers and fathers, and one-stop shop as you were.
No questions. Thank you.
you.
Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring to you House Bill 498, page 2, under modified structure rule, just about dead center. This bill does two things. It adds diagnosis to the Professional Language and Practice Act for licensed professional counselors, makes it contiguous with the other composite boards of the social workers and the marriage family therapist. The second thing this bill does is it defines psychological testing and reserves brain damage due to organic or accidental or neuropsychological conditions to the purview of the psychology board.
No questions. Thank you, Ms. Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you House Bill 1058. It's at the bottom, near the bottom of page 3 under modified structured rule. This bill cleans up some code provisions related to venereal diseases, HIV, and in particular adds a provision for syringe exchange program, and I would call this the appropriate public health response to an epidemic of IV drug abuse, and the human and economic costs of caring for AIDS and hepatitis B and C.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Clark.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I bring for your consideration today House Bill 1037. House Bill 1037 was brought to us by the Georgia Council on Aging. At this time, there's a registry hosted by the Department of Community Health, and it registers nurses' aides who are in licensed facilities. Those certified nurses' aides who are in your private homes are not on this registry. And ladies and gentlemen, most of these folks are professional. They are wonderful people in your mother and daddy's homes to take care of them, but there are 7% of those who we have complaints about, and those folks have taken medication. There is elder abuse, and it's on the rise, and so those people are not on the registry, and there's no way for one person to another family to find out that there is a complaint. This would allow them to be on that registry, and all complaints are in one space to make sure that you can find the complaint.
No
and I
question.
ask for your consideration.
Well, you do have questions. Ms. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it not true that, for clarification, that these are certified nurse assistants, that we already have a list of them, the state does, where people can go to look and see if they have license, but the state will only take complaints against them if they are working in a licensed facility in-home.
Facility, yes.
And now the way we treat people is changing, where more home care is given, and we need to allow the state to take complaints about those licenses.
Yes, Madam Chair, that's absolutely correct, and we are hoping to keep more folks in their homes, and this good care would allow that to happen.
No more questions.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I bring to you House Bill 825, number 6 at the top of page number 3, Protecting Military Children Act. This bill will simply provide for the free exchange of information between the Division of Family and Children Services and the Department of Defense to ensure that allegations and issues surrounding child abuse and neglect are promptly, appropriately investigated and resolved for the benefit of the children of military families.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Nimmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you on page 4, third from the bottom, House Bill 951, dealing with sales tax for tickets of admission. There's 3 measures in this bill. Mr. Chairman, one is extending the sales tax holiday for school supplies, the sales tax weekend for Energy Star qualified appliances, and then the sales emissions of non-reoccurring sporting events of significance of monetary value of $50 million or greater. I'd like to thank Leader Abrams and Chairman Powell and others who have worked on this bill to help get it to a palatable point, and I hope a passable measure for this body.
Ms. Smith.
Yes, thank you for your bill over here. So the sales tax holiday is twofold. One is for school students in early fall or late summer, and then the other one is Energy Star, which occurs in October. Are we talking about both of those or just one?
They're both mentioned in here. They're both reauthorized in this bill.
Just need
Yes,
you to say
ma'am. Both
that.
of them are sunsetting.
Appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Stevens has already okayed this bill yesterday. I don't know why you came.
Thank you, Chairman Stevens. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Strickland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I have 2 more for you. The first one's House Bill 229, the third one down on modified structured on page 2. This bill extends visitation rights, well, actually the right to petition for visitation rights and the grandparent visitation statute to another degree of the family, to aunts and uncles and to great-grandparents as well. We also tightened up the entire statute a little bit to hopefully avoid any future constitutional issues that could come up as well.
Mr. Willard, is that a real good bill? Have you fixed it like you fixed mine? I think they just copied your wording on mine. Okay, Mr. Earhart.
Question for you, Mr. Caldwell. I have some experience in this statutory arena. If you're going to extend visitation rights to aunts and uncles and the other
great-grandparents,
great-grandparents, there are 4. The standard visitation is every other weekend, correct? That's more often than not. There are 4 weekends in a month. If you extend to grandparents, aunts and uncles, and the third category that you said, that's going to take up all 4 weekends in a month, and the custodial parent won't have any time on the weekends. Is that what you're attempting to do? Take away all weekends from the custodial parents?
No, we're not. And with this code section, we have a clear and convincing evidence standard, which is a much tougher standard than you have in normal divorce cases. We also have a limit on how many times you can actually file an original action in this code section as well. And we also have where a judge can use their discretion. What we have right now under statute
Judge
is,
can do that now.
well, no, right now under statute you have 24-hour minimum that a judge must award visitation under this code section. We allow them to do that in the aggregate. There's more than one person that were to file here. But we have in this code section as well, we added language that says you have to have a pre-existing relationship with that child. So we're talking about someone that has basically helped raise a child that's now being denied the chance to go see that child. All we're doing is adding standing here to not just grandparents, but to great-grandparents and aunts and uncles, maybe in the same situation that a grandparent might be in currently under law. Siblings.
No more questions. Next one.
Also under modified structure of House Bill 1073, the last one, this is at request of the state bar. We're cleaning up a little bit in the juvenile code, and we just confirm what a trial court can rule on while a case is under appeal for juvenile court, and also what's required for waiver or counsel under that code section as well, just some cleanup language.
No questions. Ms. Beskey.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. This morning I bring you House Bill 959, which is right in the middle of page 3 under modified structure. This is the annual house cleaning bill for Title 20, the education bill. It's got 3 provisions related to move on when ready, 1 clarifying ethical constraints of school board members, and 2 relating to the Governor's Office of Student Achievement. I'd be happy to answer any questions you or anyone may have.
No questions.
Or ask for your favorable consideration. Thank you very much.
Ms. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to the members of the committee. I bring to you 2 bills on modified open, 6 from the top. That is substitute to House Bill 654. This bill is to require tattoo studios to post notification that tattoos on your face, neck, hand, wrist could disqualify you from joining the military.
That's a good bill, Ms. Scott.
And House Bill 913. I bring this bill to you on behalf of the Department of Veterans Affairs and the 100,000 plus female veterans of Georgia. And this bill is to create a veterans coordination position.
Any questions? Thank you. Mr. Efstration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. On page 3, I have 2 bills, modified structured. First is HB 887. Mr. Chairman, this would provide priority DFACS placement to the relatives and fictive kin of children. And fictive kin is defined as a individual related to the child not by blood but by some other connection, and the child has resided with that individual.
No questions. Next one.
Yes, sir. The next one is HB 954, same page, 4 below. This provides for a uniform guardianship jurisdiction statute that allows for recognition of guardianship orders in other states when a determination has already been made. It has been enacted in 44 other states.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm here today to ask for House Bill 922. It's the 4th from the top on the back page under structured rule. This bill simply clarifies an accounting issue we have where we're attempting to attract companies to Georgia using the Quality Jobs Tax Credit Program. The Quality Jobs Tax Credit Program is just that. It's for the higher paying jobs. This simplifies an accounting issue that we have that would make it clear that the tax-paying entity is the one that qualifies for the credit. Some of these companies are using LLCs to encapsulate liability, but the parent company is the sole member of these LLCs, and the Department of Revenue says that absent this clarification in the bill, that they have to, each LLC has to qualify independently for the job tax credit threshold of 50 employees. So this would simply clarify this accounting issue that as we attract a business to the state of Georgia, they can use these liability-friendly LLCs as part of their business structure. Happy to answer any questions.
No questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You just want to keep asking for the same bill, or you want
another one, sir.
Come on down.
Mr. Chairman, I would beg your forgiveness. I messed up last time, so I'm asking here to ask for HB 781 on page 1 in modified open rule. This bill has been modified a few times. For boards, commission, and authorities, local and state, it would require that have lawful permanent residence status. Thank you.
No questions. Thank you. Okay, members, y'all are up. Mr. Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name beside House Bill 749, first page, Representative Werkheiser. Also on the first page, House Bill 934, Representative Kirby. And put my name beside my good friend's bill, HB 1060, Representative Jaspers, on the third page.
Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the structured rule, the first bill, House Bill 471, prevents these rental equipment companies from having to pay a tax on a tax, and this allows them to pass through income in line with the heavy equipment rentals. And also, I'll put my name beside Representative Spencer's 734 and the Governor's Bill 951.
Mr. Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for the committee's consideration to move HB 734, Georgia Space Flight Act, with Representative Spencer. Important thing for our state long term. I'd also like to ask for, or put my name beside HB 654, the tattoo bill. Some communities have less than 1/3 of their 20-year-olds eligible to join the military. And I think this is a good step in the right direction.
Ms. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name on the second page at the top, House Bill 1037. That is the expanding the certified nurse registry that is already functioning to allow people to log complaints with that department if they have problems with certified nursing assistants. It's a good move toward protecting our elderly.
Mr. Powell. First Powell. J, A, B, C, D.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman. I've
Mr.
got
Powell.
two bills on page 4 under structured. The first one is HB 893. Several years ago, we reduced the threshold in 2 yearly increments as far as folks who are required to electronically file. And what we're doing now is reducing that further. We reduced it before from 1,000 in the first year and then 500 in the second year. Now we're reducing it to 250 in the first year and 100 in the second year, so that the majority of our retailers will electronically file. That'll reduce costs to the Department of Revenue. It'll also make more efficient rather than rekeying and re-entering data, which may have mistakes, and it'll reduce cost. The second bill is HB 899. This is at the request of the Attorney General's office and deals with the tobacco settlement that was entered into in 1998. And part of that settlement requires that the state maintain an escrow fund for non-settling tobacco companies so that there's a level playing field, that they contribute the same thing to the escrow fund that the settling companies contribute. And the reason that this is important is that if we do not comply with that portion of the settlement agreement that requires us to maintain and enforce the escrow provision, that the settling companies can say that they are not required to comply with the settlement. And in states where the states have been accused of not complying with the escrow requirement, it has resulted in a reduction at up to 50% of what the settling companies had to pay, which in Georgia would mean a reduction in the amount of proceeds we get every year from about 150 million down to 75 million. So this bill just tightens up the escrow requirements so that we are in compliance with the settlement agreement.
Mr. Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would like to put my name beside House Bill 498 on page 2, and on page 3, House Bill 926.
Mr. T. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of different things. I'd like to ask for HB 868, which is comes under the Zero-Based Budgeting Act to eliminate the Georgia State Games Commission. It's no longer necessary. I also like to put my name by HB 171 and the Governor's Bill HB 951.
Mr. A. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for House Bill 499. Talked about this briefly yesterday. This allows for speed zone cameras for use for traffic enforcement safety in school zones. Questions that came up yesterday about the expanding of power. Currently, we, quite frankly, we pass laws every year for specific safety enforcement and traffic enforcement. Right now we use cameras, speed cameras and such in red light. For red lights, we use them for school safety for the school buses. And this is only added to those use of those tools for law enforcement in school zones to slow people down. The bill is properly marked up so that they're properly notified with signage and all prior to these school zones. And I would ask for favorable consideration.
Ms. Dempsey.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 1085, second page, fifth one down from the top under modified open. This will streamline the federal funding process that goes from DCH to DHS previously. The Department of Community Health will be the administrator of Community Care Services Program, CCSP. The House has already moved the associated funding in the current 2017 budget, but this must be, the administration of the program must be statutorily transferred.
Ms. Smith, you have a question of Mr. Powell.
Yes, sir. Thank you for recognizing me. And to the author of the bill, I appreciate what you're doing, but I don't know if my fellow committee members get several phone calls from constituents who drive through varying school zones with varying speeds and irregular placements of the school zone signs, and essentially are filling up the coffers of local governments. And so has there been any attention paid to standardizing this?
I'm sorry, but what's your question?
My question is that I have heard from several of my constituents through the years getting speeding tickets or traffic tickets with the school zones. And when I looked into it, it is very difficult for the general public to keep up with the varying placements of school zone signs, different speed limits for different school zones. And so I'm concerned that we are putting in place something that the general public won't easily understand. And so I was wondering if there is any attention paid to standardizing or giving some clarity to the general public or some expectation of how this would be applied.
I can't address the uniformity from school to school zone, but I do know that the law is very specific that they post that the school zones are posted for speed. And what this bill does, it says that you will go outside. If a jurisdiction wishes to use these cameras, then they have to post a sign of a specific sign big enough to be seen with clear visibility 500 yards or 500 feet outside of that zone of the normal signage. It puts them on notice. As a safety precaution in there, we also gave it any school's jurisdiction that decides, or any city or law enforcement jurisdiction that decides to use these, that there's 30 days prior or 30 days after they're put into effect, there's warnings issued so that people are getting used to this, so they're not just running up and, it's just a secondary warning system that you're coming into a school zone, slow it down. We've also put in a 10-mile-an-hour gap in there, so if the speed zone is, say, 30 miles an hour, then they'll have to be running over 40 before it kicks in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you hit all the bases. Thank you.
Mr. Earhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to put my name beside HB 734, the Georgia Space Flight Act.
Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My seatmate Al Weeks had to step out to the Speaker's office, and he asked me before he left if I would mention 3 bills for him. He wanted Mr. Chairman to put his name beside House Bill 654, also House Bill 727, which is on page 3, and also House Bill 825. Thank you, sir.
Ms. Hughley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The leader had to step out, and she wanted to ask for House Bill 962. She asked for it on yesterday, and this would create a kinship care enforcement administrator within the Department of Human Services. Also, for myself, I'd like to put my name beside House Bill 542 on page 1, House Bill 654, which is Representative Scott's bill, and also House Bill 913 for Representative Scott, and lastly, House Bill 825, Representative Smith. Thank you.
Mr. C. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'd like to ask for House Bill 943 on page 3, almost halfway down. Deals with contracts and broad form identification to limited identification for architects and engineers.
Ms. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for recognizing me again. I thought I was going to have a coughing fit a while ago. On the third page, about halfway down, House Bill 954, that's the unit, I'd like to put my name by it, the Uniform Adult Guardianship Bill. We are an aging society. Alzheimer's on the rise, and this would help families that need to meet parents from out of state, or either they move and then have to move dependent parents with them a great deal. Thank you.
Mr. A. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name beside House Bill 889, Mr. Kidd's funeral home advertising bill, and also House Bill 1064 and 976, which are good public safety initiatives to help our law enforcement community by Colonel Hitchens, and also 1060, which is just good for everybody's personal rights.
Okay. We have 2 other issues on your desk. You've got amendments. You had Mr. Coomer's amendment to HB 973. Do I hear a motion on that? Any opposed to that amendment? All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed? It's on. The other amendment you've got from Mr. Willard. And this this is HB 381 that you. Yep. But on. Yeah. Wendell, you're not push your button. Nope.
This one.
Here
we go.
You're starting.
That'll do it. The discussion we had on the floor yesterday was addressing the record keeping of notaries for these logs, and what we've prepared here is an amendment to remove maintaining a log except where there is an electronic signature, which needs to be logged in so that there is a record of the fact there was electronic signatures, which you don't show a true signature. So that was the only time that a log would be necessary, and it also limits the use of these records, logs, for public records. And that was the second portion of it, lines 5 through 7.
Any questions on that? No questions. All right. Do I hear a move on that amendment? Any opposed? Mr. Knight?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not necessarily opposed to the bill, but I apologize to the author and to Chairman Willard. Maybe one of the concerns, though, elsewhere in the bill is on line 79 through 83 or 82. And I guess some concerns with maybe some small businesses where you have husband and wife that are there. And this would basically, cut out a notary from either one of those that were maybe involved in a business that had, transactions or, sorry, Chairman Willard, it's 79.
Let me do this. We're talking about the amendment on the other side. The author will be back in here to be questioned on different portions of the bill. And okay. I think that he knows of your concern on that anyway, does he not?
Okay. I don't know if I've had an opportunity to talk to him, but I will, Mr. Chairman.
But we'll get the word to him that you need to chat with him. But again, it's the amendment, and it's been moved, and I've asked for if there's any opposition. There is no opposition, so that's okay. Y'all do know that the next 2 days could be a little pressing. I'm not going to say that you're going to be here Friday night until 9:30, but I wouldn't doubt it. You are going to be here all night Monday night, so just plan for that. So we're going to start the calendar for Friday. Look under modified structure. HB 979, do I hear move? Move. Any opposed? It's on. On the front page, under open rule, HB 1084, do I hear a move? Any opposed? It's on. Under modified open, HB 654, any opposition? It's on. Under modified open, HB 749. Any opposition? It's on. Under modified open, HB 962. Any opposition? It's on. Modified open, HB 1085. Any opposition? It's on. Under modified structure, HB 498. Any opposition? Under modified structure, HB 508. Any opposition? It's on. Under modified structure, HB 736. It's on. Under modified structure, HB 887. Any opposition? It's on. Under modified structure, HB 926. It's on. Oh, I'm sorry. Any opposition? It's on. Under modified structure, HB 954. Any opposition? It's on. Under modified structure, HB 959. Any opposition? It's on. Under modified structure, HB 1053. It's on. Under structure, HB 893. Any opposition? Under structured, HB 899. Any opposition? It's on. That's your first set for Friday.